I'm in love with this man. I don't care, bitch. I don't care. Call me stupid. I will be stupid, bitch. I'll be stupid in love.
Two people went missing, a young mother and her little girl. The last person seen with them was someone they knew. Days later, the truth was found in a quiet place far away. What really happened to Meshay and Layla? Before we begin, if stories the media ignore deserve justice, then subscribe to Unseen Crime Dossiers right now. Like this video so more people can see the truth. And comment below if you believe these voices deserve to be heard. Share this story, because awareness can change everything. Welcome to Unseen Crime Dossiers, where the stories the world tries to forget are finally uncovered. Stay with us, because every case you'll see is shocking, true, and you won't want to miss a single detail.
She looks bad.
I'm tired of her. I'm so tired of her.
Look.
Meshay Melendez was a young woman who lived in Vancouver, Washington, in the United States. She was known as the mother of Layla Stewart, a 7-year-old girl who lived with her. Their daily life followed a simple routine. They stayed in their home, moved around their local area, and kept a pattern that included school, home time, and regular contact with people they knew. Layla attended school as expected for her age, and Meshay handled daily responsibilities connected to parenting and basic living. Their home environment reflected a small family unit with a parent and child dependent on each other for structure and daily activity. Meshay's role in the home involved managing basic needs, such as housing, movement, and communication. She was responsible for making decisions about schedules, transportation, and interactions with others. Layla's life centered around school attendance, rest periods, and simple activities typical for a child. The relationship between them was direct and constant because they lived together and shared the same space. There were no reports that suggested they lived separately or had long periods of distance from each other. Their routine depended on regular movement between home and outside locations, including school and other common places in the area. The area where they lived, Vancouver, Washington, is a city with residential neighborhoods, roads, schools, and public spaces.
Suck my dick and suck my cleat. In the words of Meshay. She said what? Kiss my nuts, suck my butt.
Their daily movement likely involved traveling through these locations using common transportation methods. People in their environment included neighbors, school staff, and known contacts. These surroundings formed the basic structure of their day-to-day life. Nothing about their location alone indicated immediate danger, but like many urban areas, interactions with different individuals were part of normal living conditions. At the time before the incident, Meshay had known individuals in her life, including people she had interacted with over time. One of these individuals was someone she had a past relationship with. That connection was part of her personal life and existed alongside her role as a mother. Information later showed that this relationship had issues, and there had been previous involvement with law enforcement connected to that individual. These details became important during the investigation because they helped establish patterns of interaction and possible risk factors. Layla's daily structure depended on stability provided by her home and school. As a child, she relied on adults for safety, direction, and decision-making. Her schedule would have included waking up, preparing for school, attending classes, and returning home. These routines are consistent with what is expected for a child of her age. She did not operate independently and depended fully on the adult in her household. This dependency is a key part of understanding her background, as it shows how her safety was linked directly to the actions and decisions of the adults around her. Communication played a role in their daily life. Meshay used a phone to stay in contact with others, and this became relevant later when investigators reviewed timelines. Before the incident, communication patterns likely included calls, messages, and coordination of plans. These interactions formed a record of movement and contact that would later help law enforcement understand what happened. The ability to trace communication is a common part of modern investigations, and in this case, it helped define the sequence of events leading up to their disappearance. Overall, the background of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart shows a small family unit living a routine life within a city environment. Their daily activities included home life, school, and contact with known individuals. The presence of a past relationship with a person who had prior issues with law enforcement introduced a factor that later became central to the case. Their story begins with this normal structure, which makes it possible to track changes in behavior, movement, and communication when events no longer follow their usual pattern. Meshay Melendez had a past relationship with a man identified as Kirkland Warren. Their connection did not start at the time of the incident. It had already existed before and continued in different forms over time. This type of relationship involved ongoing contact. Even after problems had been reported, records later showed that they communicated through phone calls and messages, which created a timeline of interaction that investigators could review. Their connection was not casual or brief, and became an important part of understanding how events developed. The relationship included a history of conflict. Law enforcement had previous involvement related to Warren, and this indicated that the situation had already reached a level where outside intervention was required. These prior incidents were documented and became relevant when investigators looked back at patterns of behavior. The existence of earlier legal issues suggested that the relationship was not stable and had elements that could lead to further problems. This background provided context when authorities examined the sequence of events leading up to the disappearance. Despite these issues, contact between Meshay and Warren continued. This shows that the connection was not fully ended. Even after difficulties were known, ongoing communication meant that meetings could still happen, and decisions were made that allowed interaction to continue. In many cases, relationships with prior conflict do not stop immediately, and this situation followed that pattern. The continuation of contact created opportunities for further encounters, which later became significant when determining the last known movements. Warren's history included behavior that had already drawn police attention. This factor added a level of concern because it established a record that could be reviewed during the investigation. When authorities analyze relationships in cases like this, they often look for repeated actions or warning signs. In this case, the documented past became part of the larger picture. It helped investigators connect earlier incidents with the final outcome, showing that the relationship had a pattern rather than a single isolated issue. The interaction between Meshay and Warren also involved periods where communication increased or decreased. These changes can indicate shifts in the nature of a relationship. Phone records later showed when contact occurred and how often it happened. This information allowed investigators to build a timeline that matched communication with physical movement. By comparing these details, they could identify key moments where plans were made or meetings were arranged. This level of detail is important in reconstructing events in a clear and structured way. Another important aspect of the relationship is that it involved access. Because Warren knew Meshay personally, he had a level of familiarity with her routine, her environment, and her daily patterns. This type of knowledge can affect how events unfold because it removes uncertainty about location and timing. Familiarity with a person's schedule can make it easier to predict where they will be and when they can be approached. Investigators consider this when evaluating how a suspect may have acted and how interactions were planned. The relationship between Meshay Melendez and Kirkland Warren is a central part of the case because it connects directly to the final sequence of events. It shows a history of contact, documented issues, and continued interaction despite known problems. These elements created a situation where previous patterns could influence later actions. By examining communication records, prior incidents, and the level of familiarity between them, investigators were able to understand how this relationship played a role in what happened next. On the day they were last seen in March 2023, Meshay Melendez and her daughter Layla Stewart followed a sequence of movements that later became the focus of the investigation. This day was identified through witness accounts, phone activity, and confirmed sightings. The timeline began with normal activity earlier in the day, with no immediate indication that anything unusual had taken place. As the day progressed, their movements became more specific, especially when they were seen leaving with Kirkland Warren, which marked a key moment in the case. Witnesses reported seeing them together during this period. which helped establish the last confirmed sighting. This detail was important because it provided a clear reference point for investigators. The presence of Warren at this stage placed him directly in the timeline. From that moment, there were no further verified sightings of Meshay or Layla by independent witnesses. This gap between the last sighting and the report of their disappearance became a critical window that required detailed examination. Phone records played a major role in understanding the events of that day. Investigators reviewed call logs, text messages, and location data linked to devices used by those involved. These records help confirm when communication occurred and when it stopped. Changes in communication patterns can indicate a shift in activity, and in this case, the timing of the last messages became an important marker. By aligning phone data with witness statements, investigators were able to build a more accurate sequence of events. Transportation and movement were also analyzed. It was determined that they traveled from one location to another during the day, and this movement was connected to Warren. The use of a vehicle became relevant because it provided a controlled space where interactions could take place without outside observation. Investigators later examined the vehicle for physical evidence, but on that day, it served as a key link between locations. Understanding how they moved helped narrow down possible areas where events may have occurred. As time passed on that same day, there were no confirmed contact from Meshay or Layla to family or friends. This absence of communication stood out because it did not match their usual behavior. When a person who normally communicates regularly stops without explanation, it creates concern and raises questions. This break in routine became one of the first signs that something was not following the expected pattern. It also helped define the moment when their situation changed from normal activity to a possible emergency. Investigators later focused on the time gap between the last confirmed sighting and when concerns were officially raised. This period is often referred to as a critical window in missing person cases. During this time, events can occur without immediate detection. By examining data from multiple sources, including surveillance where available, phone records, and witness input, authorities worked to fill in the missing details. Each piece of information helped reduce uncertainty about what happened during those hours. The last day of March 2023, when Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart were seen, marks the point where their routine ended and the case began. It provides a structured timeline that starts with confirmed activity and ends with a lack of contact. This transition is important because it defines when investigators needed to focus their efforts. By identifying who they were with, where they were seen, and how communication changed, law enforcement was able to establish the foundation for the investigation that followed. After the last confirmed sighting of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart in March 2023, concern began to grow when there was no further contact from either of them. Family members and close contacts noticed that calls and messages were not being answered. This change stood out because it did not match their normal communication pattern. When attempts to reach them continued without success, the situation moved from uncertainty to a need for official action. A missing persons report was then filed with local law enforcement in Vancouver. This step formally started the case and allowed authorities to begin standard procedures used in missing person investigations. Officers collected basic information, including names, ages, physical descriptions, and last known locations. Details about what they were wearing and where they were last seen were also recorded. This information was entered into law enforcement systems to support coordination and tracking. Investigators began by establishing a timeline based on available facts. They reviewed when Meshay and Layla were last seen, who they were with, and what actions were confirmed before communication stopped. Family members provided input about recent activity, routines, and any known plans. This helped officers determine whether the disappearance could be linked to a specific event or interaction. Early timeline building is a key step because it shapes how resources are used and where attention is focused. Law enforcement also started outreach efforts to gather more information. This included speaking with neighbors, checking nearby locations, and requesting assistance from the public. In some cases, missing person alerts and notices are shared through media and online platforms to increase awareness. These alerts typically include photos and identifying details to help others recognize the individuals. The goal is to expand the search beyond immediate contacts and gather any possible leads. At the same time, officers reviewed communication records linked to Meshay, phone data, including call history and text messages, was analyzed to identify recent interactions. This review highlighted individuals who had contact with her shortly before she was reported missing. One of the key names identified through this process was Kirkland Warren, who had been seen with him during the last confirmed sighting. This connection directed attention toward understanding his role in the timeline. Search efforts were organized based on the information collected. Areas connected to the last known location were prioritized, and officers used available resources to check these locations. This could include patrol searches, coordination with other units, and reviewing any available surveillance footage. Each step aimed to confirm movement patterns and identify where the situation may have changed. The search process is often adjusted as new information becomes available. The filing of the missing report marked a transition from uncertainty to an active investigation. It brought together information from family, witnesses, and communication data to form a structured case. By documenting details, identifying key contacts, and starting coordinated search efforts, law enforcement created a foundation for the investigation that followed. This stage is critical because it determines how quickly and effectively authorities can respond to a disappearance and begin uncovering what happened. After the missing persons report was filed for Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart, investigators began examining the first set of available clues. These early findings came from a mix of digital records, physical evidence, and witness statements. The goal at this stage was to reduce uncertainty by identifying patterns that could explain what happened after their last confirmed sighting. Each piece of information was reviewed carefully and compared against a developing timeline. One of the first areas examined was phone activity. Officers obtained records that showed calls, messages, and approximate location data linked to Meshay's device. By analyzing this information, they were able to determine when communication stopped and who had been in contact with her shortly before that point. These records highlighted interactions with Kirkland Warren, which aligned with witness reports, placing him with them on the last day they were seen. This connection made him a key focus early in the investigation. In addition to phone data, investigators looked at movement patterns. Location information from devices and other sources helped show where Meshay and Layla had been during their final known hours. By mapping these movements, officers identified routes and areas that required further attention. This process helped narrow down possible locations where events may have changed from normal activity to something else. It also guided search teams toward specific zones instead of covering large areas without direction. Physical evidence became another important part of the early clues. Items connected to the victims were identified and examined for relevance to the timeline. Investigators also focused on the vehicle associated with Warren, as it was believed to have been used during the time they were last seen. Forensic analysis of the vehicle aimed to identify any materials or traces that could confirm interactions or movement. This type of examination can provide direct links between individuals and locations. Witness statements added another layer of information. People who had seen Meshay, Layla, or Warren around the time of the disappearance were interviewed. Their accounts helped confirm certain details, such as the last known sighting and general direction of travel. While individual statements can vary, combining multiple accounts allowed investigators to identify consistent elements. These consistent details were then used to support or challenge other pieces of evidence. Investigators also reviewed any available surveillance footage from nearby locations. Cameras from businesses, streets, or residential areas can sometimes capture movement or vehicles passing through. Even partial footage can help confirm timing and direction. By comparing video evidence with phone data and witness reports, officers worked to build a clearer picture of the sequence of events. Each confirmed detail reduced the number of unknown factors in the case. General missing persons case to a more focused inquiry. This stage created the foundation for the next steps, where the information gathered would lead to more definitive findings. On March 22nd, 2023, the search for Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart reached a turning point when law enforcement located human remains in a remote area near Washougal. This location had been identified based on developing investigative leads gathered during the earlier stages of case. Officers moved to the scene to secure the area and begin standard procedures used in situations involving possible homicide. The discovery shifted the case from a missing persons investigation to a confirmed criminal investigation. The site where the remains were found was described as isolated, with limited public activity. This type of location often requires detailed coordination between different units, including patrol officers, detectives, and forensic teams. Upon arrival, the area was closed off to prevent contamination. Evidence markers were placed, and investigators documented the surroundings through photographs and notes. Every detail at the scene was recorded to ensure accuracy during later analysis. Identification of the victims was carried out through official methods. Authorities confirmed that the remains belonged to Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart. This confirmation relied on forensic processes, which can include medical examination and other identifying techniques. Once identities were established, the case status was updated and notifications were made to the appropriate parties. This step provided clarity about the outcome of the search and allowed investigators to focus fully on determining how the incident occurred. The cause of death was determined to be gunshot injuries. This finding was based on the examination conducted by forensic specialists. Establishing cause of death is a critical part of any investigation because it defines the nature of the crime and guides the direction of further inquiry. In this case, it confirmed that the deaths were not accidental and required full criminal investigation to identify responsibility and reconstruct the sequence of events. Investigators continued to process the scene after the initial discovery. This included collecting physical evidence, such as shell casings, and any other materials that could be linked to the incident. Each item was cataloged and prepared for laboratory analysis. The purpose of this process is to connect evidence found at the scene with other known elements of the case, such as vehicles, locations, or individuals. Proper handling of evidence ensures that it can be used reliably in court proceedings. The location of the discovery was compared with previously gathered data, including phone records and known travel routes. By aligning the physical site with earlier information, investigators were able to confirm parts of the timeline that had been under review. This comparison helped establish how the victims were moved and where the final events likely took place. It also reinforced connections between the individuals involved and the sequence of actions leading up to the discovery. The events of March 22nd, 2023, marked a critical stage in the case. The search phase concluded with the confirmation of the victims' identities and the determination of the cause of death. The investigation then moved forward with a clearer understanding of what had occurred and where it had taken place. The information gathered at the discovery site became a central part of the evidence used to build the case, linking earlier clues with the final outcome and guiding the next steps in the legal process. Following the discovery of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart, investigators shifted into a full-scale homicide investigation. The focus moved from locating missing persons to reconstructing the exact sequence of events that led to their deaths. At this stage, every detail collected earlier in the case, phone activity, witness reports, and physical evidence, was reevaluated to establish a clearer timeline and identify the person responsible. One of the central elements examined was the digital footprint of all individuals connected to the case. Investigators reviewed phone records, including call logs, text messages, and location history. These records helped confirm that Meshay had contact with Kirkland Warren shortly before she disappeared. The timing of these interactions matched the last confirmed sightings, which placed Warren at the center of the timeline. Digital data also helped identify gaps in communication that aligned with the estimated time of the incident. Attention then turned to the vehicle linked to Warren. Forensic teams conducted a detailed examination of the car, looking for biological traces, trace materials, and any objects that could connect it to the victims. Items recovered from the vehicle were documented and sent for laboratory testing. Investigators treated the vehicle as a key mobile environment where interactions could have occurred during the critical time window. The analysis of this evidence was used to support the timeline built from digital records. Another part of the investigation involved mapping movements between locations identified through phone data and witness accounts. By combining geolocation information with known road networks, officers reconstructed possible travel routes. This process helped narrow down where the victims were likely transported and where key events may have taken place. Each map point was cross-checked with surveillance footage when available, providing additional confirmation of movement patterns. Forensic analysis of the scene where the bodies were discovered also contributed to the investigation. Evidence collected at the location, including ballistic materials, was compared with findings from the vehicle and other sites. This comparison helped establish consistency between different pieces of evidence. The goal was to determine whether the same weapon or method was involved throughout the incident. Laboratory results provided technical data that supported the reconstruction of events. Witness interviews continued throughout this phase. Investigators revisited earlier statements and conducted follow-up interviews to clarify inconsistencies and gather additional details. Some witnesses provided information about prior interactions between the individuals involved, while others helped confirm timelines and movements. These statements were not used in isolation, but were combined with physical and digital evidence to create a more complete picture of the situation. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement developed a structured timeline that connected all major events. This timeline began with confirmed contact between the victims and Warren, continued through their final movements, and ended with the discovery of the bodies. Each segment of the timeline was supported by multiple forms of evidence, including phone records, forensic findings, and witness input. This structured approach allowed investigators to present a clear sequence of events that could be reviewed in legal proceedings. By the end of this phase, the investigation had established a strong evidentiary link between the suspect, the victims, and the locations involved. The collected data formed the foundation for formal charges and court proceedings. The investigation details demonstrated how multiple sources of information, digital, physical, and testimonial, were combined to reconstruct the events with precision and identify responsibility in the case. After investigators compiled evidence in the case of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart, attention shifted to formal legal action against Kirkland Warren. The arrest phase began once law enforcement determined that available evidence met the threshold required for detainment. This included digital records, forensic findings, and location data that connected Warren to the final known movements of the victims. The decision to proceed with an arrest was based on a coordinated review of all collected information. Warren was taken into custody by law enforcement officers after the investigation identified him as the primary suspect. The arrest was conducted under standard procedures, ensuring that legal protocols were followed. Officers secured the individual and transported him for processing. At this stage, authorities also ensured that all evidence supporting the arrest was documented, as it would later be required in court proceedings. The arrest marked the transition from investigation to formal criminal prosecution. Following the arrest, authorities began preparing formal charges. These charges were based on the findings gathered during the investigation, including evidence from the discovery site, vehicle analysis, and communication records. Prosecutors reviewed the case file to determine which legal statutes applied. The evidence supported multiple serious charges related to the deaths of both victims. Each charge was tied to specific findings that established involvement in the incident. Court documents outlined the allegations in detail, including the timeline of events and the role attributed to Warren. The charges reflected the severity of the case and included counts related to homicide. Prosecutors relied on the structured timeline built by investigators, which connected the suspect to the victims during the critical time window. This timeline was supported by phone data, witness statements, and physical evidence collected during the investigation. During the legal process, the prosecution team prepared to present evidence in court. This included forensic reports, digital communication records, and items recovered from the vehicle and discovery site. Each piece of evidence was organized to demonstrate consistency across different sources. The goal was to establish a clear chain of events that showed how the victims were last seen and what occurred afterward. This preparation is standard in serious criminal cases and is essential for building a strong legal argument. The defense process also began following the charges. In criminal cases, the accused has a right to respond to the allegations and challenge the evidence presented. Legal representation for Warren reviewed the case materials and prepared responses based on procedural and evidentiary considerations. This stage is part of the judicial system and ensures that all aspects of the case are examined in court. As the case moved forward, Warren remained in custody while awaiting further court proceedings. The charges filed against him officially defined the legal framework of the case, shifting it from investigation to prosecution. The arrest and charging phase consolidated all prior investigative work into a formal legal process. This stage ensured that the evidence collected by law enforcement would be evaluated under the judicial system to determine responsibility in the deaths of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart. Here at Unseen Crime Dossiers, we're driven by a mission to uncover hidden realities, honor forgotten voices, and keep their memories alive. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, there's more coming that will challenge you even deeper. Make sure to hit subscribe, tap the like button, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a case. We're dropping new episodes regularly. And trust us, what's ahead is even more chilling. Before you go, we want to hear from you. What moment hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. Your perspective matters, and your voice helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay alert, stay informed, and never stop seeking the truth, because every life deserves to be heard. Thanks you all for watching.